Hello! Today we're going to talk about the Constitutional Convention, which I know we've done a lot today. We're going to keep doing it. So you've only got two things to do in this flipped classroom. First thing, the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention were supposed to meet for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. Why did they abandon that task and just create a new constitution? That's question number one. Again, this is how your assignment should be organized. Feel free to pause this video at any point. So these are all things we went over earlier today. You've got the New Jersey Plan, the Virginia Plan, the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise or Sherman's Compromise, and then the Three-Fifths Compromise. The New Jersey Plan was the small state plan. They wanted the legislature to have equality among the states, so 2 representatives per state, the way that the Articles of Confederation were. Virginia Plan was wanted a legislature based on population. It's the big state plan. The compromise that Roger Sherman came up with was to create a bicameral legislature, one house with equal representation, the Senate, and the other house with representation based on population, the House of Representatives. And then, of course, the Three-Fifths Compromise is a compromise dealing with representation in the Senate as well as taxation for states. The North did not want slaves, obviously, to count for taxation because there were not a lot of slaves in the North. And because they knew that that would boost the South's representation. The South wanted slaves to count for representation, which is just weird because in every other legal context, slaves were considered property, not people. But I'm not even going to get into the mental cartwheels that it takes for an entire group of people to, on one hand, view slaves as people when it's helpful to them, and on the other hand, not. So the compromise is that slaves would count as 3/5 person for both states, which would boost the Southern representatives in Congress, but not so much that it would make the North nervous. So this is another thing we've gone over in class. The Constitution has 3 basic components. There's the preamble, remember the song. There are 7 articles, remember let every judge stand and defend rights. The first 3 articles deal with the establishment of the 3 branches of government and what their expressed powers are. And then there are the 27 amendments, the last of which was added in the 90s. And by the way, the 27th Amendment, I don't remember if I mentioned this in class, is the oldest amendment. It was actually proposed in George Washington's era and just kept getting brought up because it didn't have an expiration date and finally passed in the 90s. All right, so we have a federal system now. These are the 6 principles of the Constitution. There's limited government, no one is above the law, popular sovereignty. That's the We the People section of the preamble, the idea that people rule, checks and balances to prevent tyranny, federalism, division between federal and state governments, separation of powers, and then judicial review, what is constitutional and what isn't. And that last bit, of course, isn't actually in the Constitution. It was added by the Supreme Court itself in Marbury versus Madison. So this is the second thing you'll do in your flipped assignment today. As I go through definitions of each of these 6 constitutional ideas, I just want you to draw a chart and then come up with one modern day example for each. So, for example, with checks and balances, you might say the United States declared war on Japan in World War II, or the War Powers Act, which you should know from American history, was created by Congress to check the powers of the president at a time when when presidents were deploying troops to areas where we had not declared war, like Vietnam or Korea. Anything like that. It can be anything from the 20th or 21st century. It doesn't have to be super modern. So, starting with the first basic principle, limited government. No government is all-powerful. The idea is that our government will only do what people say it can do, and the government must obey the law. That's called rule of law. And it's a big part of constitutionalism. The second principle is, popular sovereignty. It's the idea that all political power rests with the people. It is established with the opening words of the Constitution. The national government draws its power from the people, and the people draw their power from the Constitution, more specifically the Bill of Rights. So give me a modern example of this. Checks and balances. Each branch is subject to restraints from other branches. This prevents an unjust combination of the majority, which is something Federalist 51 said. It can be a problem when the president and the majority of Congress belong to the same party, though, because that can upset the balance that was intended for this. So, like, for example, there are not enough Democrats right now in Senate to block a lot of Donald Trump's proposals. So find a specific example of that. I think that's a good area to look into. Federalism. We've gone over this several times in class. This is the division of the central government and the regional governments, in our case, state governments. Some power belongs to the federal government, some to the states, and some are concurrent. Separation of powers. Political power is separated between three distinct separate branches of government. It's a way for the framers to balance a strong government with the freedom of the people. So for this, a modern example of something that either only the judicial branch is doing, only the executive branch can do, or only the legislative branch can do. Judicial review, this is the last one of the basic principles. This is the power of courts to determine whether a government act is in line with the Constitution. The court can declare certain acts unconstitutional, and again, this was established by Marbury versus Madison. I am sure you'll see Marbury versus Madison on the test I give you next week, and it'll definitely be on your final exam, so I'm just gonna beat it to death. Alright, any questions? Let me know in class. I hope that you enjoyed this very short lecture. Good luck with your flipped assignments. See y'all tomorrow.